Today, I'm going to analyze the presentation that Michael Saylor, CEO of MicroStrategy, did to Microsoft with one goal, trying to convince one of the largest companies around the world to buy Bitcoin today. And we're going to analyze what are the key elements that Michael Saylor put in the table through his presentation so you can understand what you can do. Number one, he said, okay, digital capital is a new technological wave. And if we see the story from Microsoft, they were the leaders on personal computer. Bill Gates had the vision to build personal computer. And they copy the graphical user interface for Windows. And that's the reason everyone used it. But then when the internet came, well, their browser was one of the top, Internet Explorer, but then they failed due to Firefox and Chrome. Then mobile phones appear, and Microsoft was pretty bad. Remember, they even bought Nokia to try to implement, but they couldn't compete neither with Android or with Apple. So at the beginning, they missed the cloud computing. Finally, they launched Azure, and Azure is one of the largest business units of Microsoft. And in artificial intelligence, they have been very smart because they have invested in OpenAI with more than $10 billion. So I agree with Saylor here. Digital capital is a next wave. Actually, it's not next. It has been for the past 11 years. I'm Francisco. I'm a PhD researcher in asset tokenization and an innovator from the MIT in blockchain technologies. So I know what I'm talking about here. Let's go to the next point that Michael Saylor put. He says, when you compare the valuation of Bitcoin as an asset, now it's an asset that is in position number 7, just even behind Microsoft. So it's the fastest growing, most digital, he says, more useful. And everyone that has been in crypto knows that the potential for Bitcoin is to surpass gold. So if now gold is 18 trillion, well, probably Bitcoin can do 10 times more or more than the current market cap. So I agree in this sense with Michael Saylor in terms of one of the most valuable asset. And that's the reason he's saying that Bitcoin is digital capital. One of the key things of Bitcoin is that people like to buy Bitcoin, but they don't like to spend Bitcoin. Because if we believe that it's going to be one of the most important assets, Bitcoin will not be very good for daily life. Actually, it's just like a reserve asset. It's something that you want just to keep for the next 20, 30, or even 50 years. So when you compare assets around the world and you see the wealth distribution through assets, well, Bitcoin is just a tiny thing, but it's incredible technology that was born only in 2008. And from 2008 to 2024, it has gone to more than $2 trillion. But if you see all the elements of all the assets, well, there's a big potential for growth. And that's the reason I'm a firm believer of asset tokenization as the next wave of blockchain technology. But I'm going to talk about that in other video. So the key element is to understand how people will preserve their value and preserve their capital. Of course, there are many elements that Saylor calls, and that's the reason he believes that Bitcoin will eat most of the market because, well, it's one of the few assets that no government, no one can have direct control. Like anyone around the world can do it. And just look this. That's what Saylor believes. He believes that Bitcoin could grow 100 times in the next 2 decades. So even though if you believe in Saylor or not, what is real is that more people are buying Bitcoin, the ETFs on Bitcoin are created, and now everyone understands that they need to put from 1 up to 5% of their assets. And even though if you're thinking that the total assets right now is 900 trillion, but it's going to grow to 4,000 trillion, crazy numbers. I know those are crazy numbers. Well, Bitcoin at 280 trillion is not so crazy. So that's the key thing about Bitcoin as a new asset class that is more powerful than previous ones. Now, one key element that you should take into consideration is that MicroStrategy has been investing and buying a lot of Bitcoin. They just completed more than 400,000 Bitcoin bought. And of course, when you see here, like he's comparing the annualized performance of assets over the last 4 years, and he's showing that Bitcoin has outperformed all the other ones, both the Magnificent Seven, Microsoft, and even ETF. So that's one of the key points. And also, how is outperforming even Microsoft. So this is interesting because you're saying, okay, buy Bitcoin because it's the future, because you're not so good. That's a funny thing. But the key thing about MicroStrategy is like if MicroStrategy works and convinces Microsoft, then the vision of Sailor will become true. So it will be like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And even though if it doesn't convince Microsoft today, in the future, most companies will need to buy Bitcoin in their reserves. Why you have to wait for Bitcoin to be $100,000? Well, not necessary. And of course, there are candidates that is saying that Bitcoin could be a reserve. President Trump also came to the conference and said, okay, Bitcoin could be an essential element. And what we're seeing is a trend that companies around the world can either cling in the past or embrace the future. And investing in the future is buying Bitcoin, which I completely agree on Sailor. I also will add that you will need to have a diversified portfolio of cryptocurrencies, not only Bitcoin. Of course, Sailor is what we can call a maximalist, someone that believes that only that asset will grow. But I don't believe in that. I believe that Bitcoin will grow, but also other assets such as Ethereum, such as Solana, will be very powerful assets in this new environment. So, the proposal from Michael Saylor for Microsoft to start thinking and creating their Bitcoin reserve is a very smart reserve. And by adding Bitcoin as part of treasury, they can follow a similar strategy for MicroStrategy. And for MicroStrategy, it has worked tremendously. And I did another video about MicroStrategy. So this is the calculations that is he doing without Bitcoin and then with Bitcoin. It's funny. It's like those ads, like without and with it. But it's very interesting how by owning Bitcoin immediately adds value to the company. And that's part of the vision of MicroStrategy. Yeah, that's the reason you should also in your portfolio have 1 to 5% in cryptocurrencies. And Bitcoin should always be part of your portfolio. So that is my advice. That is my analysis on Michael Saylor's position to Microsoft. And we should start doing the same. And I've been talking about for many years. The first time that I talked about Bitcoin was in 2013, but I didn't just bought it and I convinced that it was gonna reach 100,000. No, I didn't know. I also sold my Bitcoin or lost Bitcoin. Or I don't know what was that Bitcoin. But until the last years, I've been analyzing, reflecting, and seeing a trend on how Bitcoin really is gonna be that important asset. So please subscribe to the channel if you want more tips, analysis on investment.